Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event. Thank you all so much for being here with us. And thank you as well to our friends at Barnes& Noble for making this possible and for all of your wonderful support of our books and our authors. My name is Andy Ward, and I'm the publisher of Random House. And I'm thrilled to be here tonight with the great Mbue, who I have the great fortune to work with, and whose amazing new novel, How Beautiful We Were, was published this week on Tuesday. And Bolo and I are going to have a little conversation here for about 20-25 minutes, and then we are going to take questions from our audience. So please feel free as you're listening along here, just throw your questions in the chat, and when Mbolo and I wrap up our little conversation, we'll get to your questions and answer as many of those as possible. So feel free to fire away. All right, Mbolo, I'm going to share with our listeners tonight something about you that you don't read any of your reviews.
I don't.
You never read your reviews, so I do. Just you might want to close your ears here for a second.
Oh no! If you're reading it, then I should listen.
No, but the reviews of your book so far have been really amazing and stunning, actually. Your book is going to appear on the cover of the New York Times Book Review next week, and I feel like it's the attention that it's getting is just a real testament to everything that you put into this book. So I just want to congratulate you on that before we get started. It's been an incredible launch for.
I congratulate you. You are the best. You're the best editor I could ever ask for this book. So this congratulations to you too.
You make it easy. I think a lot of the people here listening tonight know you probably from your first novel, Behold the Dreamers, which was a big bestseller and an Oprah Book Club pick, and I think really made its way out into the world in a way that few books do, which is a beautiful thing. And I kind of can't wait for those people to see what you're up to in this new book, because I feel like How Beautiful We Were is it's a different kind of book for you. And I feel like it's a real step forward artistically for you as well. It's a very ambitious novel. And I thought it might be nice for you just to lay out for people sort of, I hate to ask you to summarize your own book, but could you tell us just a little bit about, the story that you're telling in this book? And then we'll get to some of the reasons why you decided to tell that story later.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Andy, my wonderful editor. I just gush about you all the time. Thank you to Barnes & Noble for having me, and to everybody who is here today. So like you said, Andy, it is in many ways different from Behold the Dreamers. It is a story about a small African village and what happened when this village decided to fight against an American oil company that had been polluting their land for many years. So the story starts in 1980 and it goes over the course of 40 years. And it's mostly told by the children growing up in this village who, when the story starts, because of all the pollution caused by this oil company, the rivers are covered with toxic waste, the pipelines are spilling, the air is just very dirty and the children are getting sick and the parents are very concerned. And one day they decide to start fighting this oil company. So the story starts with these children watching their parents fight, and then it goes on to see when their children, when they grow up, they take on this fight. And at the center of the story is one of these children. Her name is Thula, and she grows up to become the person who leads this movement to bring this oil company to justice. And so she becomes a revolutionary. And so the story is about a community, it's about a struggle, it's about a generation of people, and it's very much about the price people are willing to pay to fight for justice, to fight for what they believe is fair treatment.
That's beautifully summarized, Mbue. You did that pretty well. And I think what you captured is, some of the reviews have called it a vast and sweeping story, and it truly is. I mean, it takes place over decades. It takes place in an unnamed African country in a small fictional village there. that is sort of been degraded and victimized by this oil company that sets up shop
Mhm.
right next door and proceeds to pollute the village and take advantage of its citizens. But I want to talk a little bit about your journey writing this book, because I find it fascinating, and it's a rare and unusual story that people might not know listening in, that this book you began writing this book 17 years ago, before Behold the Dreamers was even a glimmer in your mind. Right. And so this is something that you've been working on much of your adult life, and something that you put away in a drawer for several years, and then came back to. And I'm wondering if you could talk about your process a little bit, bringing this novel to term, bringing it into the world.
Right.
And then I find it a fascinating sort of creative story, but also an inspiring one as well for people out there who have creative pursuits or dream of being writers. And it's an example, I think, of what hard work and persistence can bring. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey writing this book?
Yes, yes, thank you. So that so this is the first thing I started writing the moment I decided to start writing. And it was 17 years from when I started to when I finished, because I finished a book in 2019, right? And then it didn't come out in 2021. So at this point, it's actually 19 years
Right.
from when I started. And so I started it the moment I had this thing within me, whatever it's called, that compelled me to start writing. The moment I felt like I would like to start writing, this was the first story I wanted to tell. And I started writing it. And of course, I didn't know the first thing about writing. I didn't know anything about the craft, nothing about character or plot or pacing, nothing. I just started writing the story of this African village and this girl and this struggle and this group of young men and the dictatorship. I just threw in everything that I felt, but it just wasn't very good storytelling. So I struggled with it for, I don't know, maybe 9 years. I had no grand ambition of being a writer. I did this whole time. I had regular jobs. I had many different jobs. I went to graduate school for master's in education. I had a corporate job. And then I lost my job. But the whole time I just kept on writing this story as a hobby. And then one day in 2011, at this point it's 9 years of writing it, I got an inspiration to write something else, a story about an immigrant family in New York City, and also the executive of Lehman Brothers, and how these two families' lives intersected during the financial crisis. And I remember when I got the inspiration, I was so happy because I got to leave this fictional African village and come to New York City.
Yeah.
Because like, wow, I get to write about people taking subways and sitting at Colombo Circle, and the things that were more closer to my life than this fictional village we had never been to.
And in some ways, a more contained story for you to write.
Yes,
too.
yes. It was much closer to me. I was an immigrant in New York City. I lived in Harlem. I'd lost my job during the financial crisis. Right. It just was so liberating and enjoyable to write Behold the Dreamers after this. Yeah. So I wrote Behold the Dreamers, and as would happen, that novel, went to Random House and was published in 2016. And the moment that happened, I just knew that I had to go back to this story. Like I couldn't do anything else except go back. And it was a wonderful thing for me that it happened in 2016, because 2016 was a year that, if you remember, it was, there was a lot going on that year. The 2016 elections, Flint, Michigan, there was so much in the news. And all of that gave me so much. So first of all, I had the confidence of having written one book. Yeah. Second, I had grown as a person. I was much older now. And then there was so much happening around between, what was happening with the elections, and then after the elections, the Black Lives Matter and the Women's March and Standing Rock. There was so much happening around me that gave me inspiration. And so when I went back to the novel, like something like The Voice of the Children. So the novel is told by these children, and they speak as one. They speak in the first person plural. That just came naturally, because by 2016, I had been thinking a lot about what it's like to be a child living in a world that doesn't make sense to you, a world in which there's so much injustice against children and nobody seems to be doing anything about it. And events had happened that had really upset me. Sandy Hook had happened and Flint, Michigan had happened, and there was so much gun violence and a lot of it was affecting children. So I started thinking, imagine what it's like to be a child. And so I used that to kind of create the voice of the children speaking as one, because these children in that village were going through something similar to what the children in Flint, Michigan were going through. Like
that became your way in.
That's right.
I mean, I think about this all the time. It's really an incredible story, and it's something that, yeah, again, like anybody who aspires to, create things or to be a writer, you like Mbolo, your story, you could just bottle that, and people could just listen to that, and it's a good way of remembering that these things do have a way of coming around if you really stick with it and put the work in and believe in yourself. It's kind of incredible that you
Thanks, Andy.
came back and pulled this off. You mentioned the voice of the novel. So the voice of the novel is there are different perspectives in the novel. The sort of baseline in the novel is a collective voice. It's a chorus. It's the children in the village. And there are other points of view throughout chapters that are narrated by members of one family over decades in this village. So it's a really sort of inventive and beautiful way of telling the story. I'm wondering if you'd just read a few paragraphs from the beginning of the book, which is in the voice of the children, so people can get a sense of the beautiful sort of musical quality of that voice.
Thank you, Andy. So I'm going to read from How Beautiful We Were. I guess it's backwards, but it's How Beautiful We Were. It's the same cover. I'm going to read just the first 2 paragraphs. Right at the beginning of How Beautiful We Were. We should have known the end was near. How could we not have known? When the sky began to pour acid and rivers began to turn green, we should have known our land would soon be dead. Then again, how could we have known when they didn't want us to know? When we began to wobble and stagger, tumbling and snapping like feeble little branches, they told us it would soon be over, that we would all be well in no time. They asked us to come to village meetings to talk about it. They told us we had to trust them. We should have spat in their faces, heaped upon them names most befitting: liars, savages, unscrupulous, evil. We should have cursed their mothers and their grandmothers, flung pejoratives upon their fathers, prayed for unspeakable calamities to befall their children. We hated them and we hated their meetings, but we attended all of them. Every 8 weeks, we went to the village square to listen to them. We were dying, we were helpless, we were afraid. Those meetings were our only chance at salvation.
So beautiful. And it's just, I think, sets up from the very beginning the sense that, this is a story that is, it's in some ways about power and the powerful and the powerless, and and heroes and kind of heroes and villains in a way. But I also, what I really love about this is that the story gets complicated and the characters get complicated, and the dynamics between these two forces, the large multinational oil company and this small village, things get complicated and people turn out to be, I think we all have some hero and some villain in us to some degree. And it would have been very easy, I think, for you to write this in a sort of black and white way, and yet you really resisted that. And I could see the way that you were, through various drafts, complicating these characters from the oil company, say, who could have been just sort of cardboard bad guys out to destroy this village. It turns out maybe they are, they're not exactly forces for good in the world, but they're complicated people. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about, your decision to do that and sort of your reasons for it. And I would love to hear what you have to say about that.
Right. I think, I am fascinated by human beings. I mean, that is one of the reasons why I write novels, right? Because human nature is fascinating. And I have yet to meet somebody who I don't think, is a complex character. I think that that is just what we are by nature. So nobody is, you're not good because you're a poor African villager, right? And and they're not poor in the sense that they don't have, but the fact that they're living in this environment that really deprives them of necessities. But being an African villager doesn't make you a good person, and neither does working at an oil company make you a bad person necessarily. We are all humans and we have different motivations. So it's always important to me to show characters in their full complexity, to say, this African villager is trying to fight for justice, but they also have these things about them that are not so noble. Or this oil company employee, makes his living from this oil company, but he also cares about helping people. So that is important to me, that I don't, also that I don't judge my characters. It's not really my place to judge. It is my place to present them to the reader and to leave it to the reader to decide. I mean, I could write the most wonderful character and you still might not like them, right? So it's not my duty to be, please feel for these African villagers because their land is polluted. Like, I'll tell you what they're going through. I'll show you who they are, and then you make your decision. And so it is a case of stepping away, not having an agenda, right? Because when you have an agenda to say, I'm going to write a story that says, look at what these people are going through and look at how hard it is for them, then you start having an agenda and then it becomes this preachy thing. But I am not a preacher. I am a novelist, right? If I wanted to preach to people, I'll become a preacher and tell you what is right and what is wrong.
Right. But I think that's right. It's not, it could be, what could be sort of a delivery system for an idea,
right,
is actually all about it's not about that at all. It's about the people.
Right. It is about the people, and it is about showing them, because I mean, obviously, as a human, right, I am very upset about the degradation of the environment for the sake of profit. I am very upset about a lot of injustice in the world. But when I come to write a novel like this, I have to also show the people on both sides. And that allows me to also write about the struggle. And this is a novel that has to do, like you said earlier, it has to do with power. This is a small African village that doesn't have a lot of resources to fight a multinational. How do you go about doing that? Yeah. There has to be a lot of sacrifice involved. There has to be a lot of tough decisions involved. There has to be a lot of somewhat unethical decisions involved. So I have to show them making all these decisions. And that is why the story goes for so many years, because on both sides, people try different strategies, right? That is why I don't like to say it's a David versus Goliath story. I like to think it's a Goliath versus Goliath story, because these African villagers, they realize right early on in the novel that they are also powerful. Just because we don't have big lawyers in New York City on our side doesn't mean that we don't have something. Their love for their land gives them power. Their connection to their ancestry is powerful. Everything that they have, that is worth fighting for. That determination gives them a certain kind of power that is not quite what the multinational has with all of its money and lawyers and everything, but it is something. And so they come to an awareness that they are also powerful. And I really believe that is something that I've noticed, how much people don't realize how powerful they are until they are in a situation that pushes them, and then they realize, I am powerful. I can take a stand against this.
Well, so I think that's the perfect segue into a little conversation about the character really at the heart of this story. I mean, there are many characters in this story, but I feel like the central character in the story is a young woman named Thula, right? Who becomes this, when we first meet her, she's a very young girl, and she grows into the revolutionary that you're talking about. And I'm curious to hear sort of what your inspirations were for her. She's an incredibly charismatic, but also flawed character, as you were saying. She's not a perfect person. She's not idealized in any way.
Right.
But I'm curious what your inspirations were for her as a character, and how you came to develop her at the center of the story.
So I guess I should talk about my inspiration for the novel as a whole, right? Because people say to me, how did you come about to start writing a novel like this? And it's very rooted in my childhood. growing up, I was very fond of revolutionaries. I had a fascination with anybody who stood up to fight against injustice. As a child, it was just something in my DNA that attracted me to people who stand up and rise and raise their fist, and the crowd that said, yeah, freedom, justice. I love all those things. So,
Yep.
so I also grew up, in the 90s in Cameroon, and it was a time where I felt as if revolutionaries were somewhat of rock stars. Right, we were celebrating the Mandelas, and we had other revolutionaries that maybe they're not as well known in America, like Patrice Lumumba or Thomas Sankara or Steve Biko. These were all like people who really fought for justice and freedom. And then I came to America, and then I only read more about them. I discovered Dr. King and Malcolm X. I read a lot about Gandhi. So Thula is a composite of all of these great.
Yeah, totally. Hearing you say that is that,
right. So I took all of these men, and I've read their stories, and I know a lot about, quite a bit about what they've been through. And maybe, I guess I had never really thought about how all of these people were celebrated for being revolutionaries. They were not women. They were all men, and I said to myself, what about the women? I mean, there has to be women who have fought against injustice, and we see more of it now. But growing up in the 90s, I didn't exactly see it. So when I started writing this novel, I wasn't thinking about. I wasn't quite there yet, in really shaping this character of Thula. It's when I came back in 2016 that I really saw Thula, and I saw this woman who had all these qualities, who could have, the kind of drive that Dr. King had, or Malcolm X had, or Mandela had, like all of that. I could see her. I could see this woman, and I also could see how difficult it is for a woman to be a revolutionary, a woman to come and say, I'm going to fight this oil company, and I'm also going to throw out the dictatorship in this country and create a better country.
Well, she's constantly underestimated and belittled along the way in her campaign.
That's right.
She's an amazing character, and I can see all of that inspiration in her.
Right. Yes.
I think I'm going to ask you one more question. I think we're going to get to some audience questions here in 1 second. I just wanted to touch on one more thing, which is, so you mentioned that you grew up in Cameroon, and which was a country that had an oil and gas presence, right? There were oil companies who were doing business there, not far from where you grew up. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, environmental degradation is a theme in this book. And I'm wondering if that is also something that came out of, your childhood and exposure to these companies as a child in Cameroon.
Yeah, so I grew up in Cameroon. I am Cameroonian, and I grew up in a town called Mbue, that is where the oil refinery in our country is. Our country had just one oil refinery, and it was in Mbue. And so I was aware how much the oil wealth didn't exactly come to people in my town, right? The oil wealth went to the country's elite, the powerful people. And so even as a child, I was very aware of the politics of oil. But there was an incident that happened when I was a child, when it didn't happen in my country. It happened in Nigeria. There was a famous environmentalist. His name was Ken Saro-Wiwa, and he was murdered. He was executed because he took a stand against an oil company. And I remember, even when I was a child, how much this affected me. And that was what opened my eyes to environmental degradation around the world, and how much there is so much of it happening. And
that was Nigeria, right? Was that
that's in Nigeria? But I wasn't thinking so much about that when I started writing this book. But in 2016, when I went back to the novel, I was thinking a lot about environmental issues, because there's a lot of it happening. BP oil spill, for example, that happened. Standing Rock, which was an issue that had to do with pipelines. There's also a major environmental crisis in Ecuador.
Right.
So when I came back to the novel, I had been thinking about the environment a lot as a human, right? Also about climate change as a human who cares about, our planet. And so I did a lot of research. That was mostly research. I researched cases of environmental degradation around the world. And I also researched, because it's very important to me that even this is a fictional place, that it has to be true and real. And so I had to do it. It was a ton of research that went into, I read books I read even academic articles about,
I remember. In that case in Ecuador with Chevron was a big.
Yes.
big
yeah,
inspiration for you as well for this.
yeah, yeah. And I had to learn a lot about oil exploration and oil fields and oil wells. Because even though I grew up in a town with oil, I can't say I really understood like how that works. And I can't say I completely still understand oil exploration, but I had to learn a lot about that, in order to get certain elements of the book right.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Can we get to some questions from the audience now? We've got some great ones here in the chat. So I'm going to pick a couple.
Okay.
Okay. Did your writing process change between Behold the Dreamers and How Beautiful We Were?
I wouldn't say my process changed. I really don't have a writing process. I just wake up and write every day whenever I have to write and whenever my editor gives me deadlines, because I had quite a few deadlines.
But you write every day.
Not every day, but yes, I guess right now I have a book coming out. I'm not writing, right? I'm writing other things, but I can't say I saw a significant change, but it was different in the fact that when I went back to this book, I was already a published writer. So I had, I had events to do and travel. And so I had to balance that. And I remember one time I met this novelist and he said, oh, you have to learn how to write while you're traveling, but I never did that. I only write in my house,
Right.
and I don't write in planes, I don't write in hotels, I just don't do that. I like to sit on my desk and write.
Do you find that the more that you do this, do you find that you repeat the same mistakes, or do you learn to avoid certain pitfalls that that you made as a younger writer, or are those pitfalls just part of the process and it's going to happen no matter what you're doing?
I don't. That's a good question. I don't think so. But also, Behold the Dreamers and How Beautiful We Were was such different books in many, as far as craft-wise, as far as structure and pacing. And so I can't see what the number one thing that I took away from Behold the Dreamers was just confidence, right? But I learned a lot about dialogue, I learned about pacing, but you were my editor, you saw that, like I still had, even after you write one book, you still need an editor to push you. And
It's
you
never easy for anybody. Yeah, writing a book is never easy.
Pushing me, like push. You can go deeper.
It's hard, brutal work, but you do it. So here's another question. It's a great question. It's the ultimate question, really. What do you want readers to take away from How Beautiful We Were?
Oh, yeah, that question.
A great question.
It is a work of art. It is open to interpretation. That is all I can say. I mean, it is a work of art that I poured my heart into. I mean, not that I didn't pour my heart into Behold the Dreamers, because I did, but this novel was very personal to me. And again, people think that I grew up in a place that had environmental degradation, but that is not the case. My town did not have it. It is personal to me because it came from a place of love. Because the love I saw for people who stood up for a cause, the fascination and respect I had for them, I wanted to portray that honestly, to make sure that I didn't do a disservice to what is involved on either side, whether you're on the side of the corporation or the side of the people fighting to live in a clean environment. That it was important that I tell their story to the best of my ability. So that was important, and the whole experience was very, very personal.
Right. Well, that's a good answer.
Yeah.
I have a question about the book cover. It says, "Can you tell us more about the book cover? It is striking."
Let me put it up one more time.
Yeah.
It is
beautiful.
Yes, Andy, why don't you talk about this book cover?
I think this is a piece of fine art, actually, that our art director Joe Perez, I think, found with a designer that he was working for, and for whatever reason, I think designing a book jacket is never an easy thing.
No.
Not like you try, your first try works. It's usually a long process with many, many, many different ideas and approaches, and and many sort of failed attempts along the way. For whatever reason, I think Mbue, when we saw this image, it just felt exactly right for this book.
Yeah. Well, when you came to me first and you said, what do you imagine for your jacket? And I said something very colorful, right?
Yeah, I know, exactly.
I am West African. I love my color. I'm almost always wearing colors. Give me red, yellow, blue, pink, something. Yeah. And then they came back and I said, "Where's the color?"
Right. And then we actually tried to put the title in color and everything, but but the black and white looked so beautiful. And so beautiful. I mean, you can, Mbolo, why don't you? I mean, it would be interesting to hear you talk a little bit about why this particular image, these sculpted hands, clasped hands, what that meant for you and why it resonated for this particular story too. Because I felt like when you saw it, you knew.
Well, it wasn't that quick actually, because before we saw that jacket, we'd seen a lot of colorful jackets. So we went in that direction. And then all of a sudden, the art department sends us this. And I said, "Oh, what is what is that?" So my initial reaction was, wait, I didn't really think about it because I was so confused. Like, why?
So striking.
Why that image would represent a story about African villagers fighting an American oil company. And then I realized, wow, what a powerful image. It is so evocative. It's about love and togetherness and strength. I mean, that image says, to me, it says so many things. But one thing it says to me is that, you know, here we are, where we are going to march on. We are resilient. You know, you will not bring us down. I mean, no, we're not going to give away the story, but it is a story of incredible determination. And I think that this image just captures that.
Yeah, me too.
And so that was one of the things that really, you know, attracted us. But we were very happy when it all came together. And
I think it's beautiful. It's a great question. Okay, let's have another one here. Okay, why the title? Why not How Beautiful We Are?
Good one. So again, behind the scenes on how this sausage is made.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I struggled with my first book's title. I had a very difficult time. It was not easy to come up with the title "Behold the Dreamer." So when I had to come up with the title for this one, I wanted to have a title way before we needed to have its final title. And Andy was like, "Don't worry about it. Let's go with whatever." So I had 20 different titles. And then one day we had one title that you were like, I knew you weren't keen on it, but you were like, "Don't worry about it. It's all good." Wonderful editor, you know how to not put pressure on me. And then we went out to lunch one day, and I said, because I had been there's a book in the Bible, because I am a person of faith, and there's a book in the Bible called Song of Solomon, and there was a verse that said, "How beautiful you are, my darling," or "How beautiful." And I said to myself, wow, what a powerful declaration of love. And because this story ultimately is a love song. These people are declaring their love for their homeland. That is why they're fighting. So I thought that phrase, "How beautiful you are," if I were to just change it a little bit and make it to "How beautiful we were," then it captures. And I was concerned, and I think I said to you that I was concerned that the past tense gives away the ending of the book, because if you say "How beautiful we were," it's like, okay, we're no longer beautiful. Then what happened, right? Okay, but you weren't concerned. I also was concerned that maybe it was a little too, an older couple sitting on their porch, holding hands and talking about back when
right.
Like a romance novel. Right. And you said, no, you weren't concerned about that.
No, I find it really wistful in a good way. Like I think it captures something about this book that I feel like just worked immediately for me. But that's a really good question, and I think also you're discovering that phrase in the Bible is really interesting to me too. I had forgotten about that, but
I did, because I think they also are. Because at that point I was so like, I had a title which I won't even say because it was just not a very good title, and then I came up with this one. And the moment they said "How beautiful we were," you were like, "That's it." I was like, "Really?" You're like, "That's it." And then you asked, we had asked a few people, and they're like, "That's it." And and then it's so funny because I feel like this artwork, it could be called "How Beautiful We Were," right? It's the artwork and the title, they just go together so well.
Yeah, it does. Okay, here's another one. You said that you had comparable experiences with characters in Behold the Dreamers. Do you feel similarly about any of the characters or events in the new novel? Yeah, I think just in terms of your personal
Right.
experience connecting to this story and these people? Is that, I mean, you talked about Thula a little bit and
Right.
where she came from, but what about the other characters in this village? What about the village itself?
Right, right. So I'll say Tula is a character that I probably have a little bit more in common with, because Tula is a skinny African girl. I was a skinny African girl. She was bookish. I was bookish. So she sat around and pondered the world a little too much and why certain things were the way they were. And that was me. I remember when I was probably 10 or 11, I asked my mother, what is human rights? Why doesn't everybody human rights gets respected? That was just the kind of kid I was. And I think that is what Thula is. Now, the difference between Thula and I is that Thula became a revolutionary. And, you know, I am proud of who I am, and nobody's going to mistake me for a revolutionary.
Well, I don't know.
So Thula came to America. We came to America around the same ages as teenagers, and we both went to college here. But Thula went to college, and in her college days, she was, involved in protests and marching and all of that stuff. When I was in college, I was hanging out in my friends' dorms and working in the dining hall. Like I wasn't doing any of that. So, but it was, I think that is why I said that it's very personal, because I think it does come from that part of me who was this child trying to make sense of the world. And I was a very sensitive child, and I grew up to be a sensitive adult also, which is why this book was emotionally grueling for me, because I'm just very sensitive, which I'm hardly the only writer who is sensitive by nature. We are sensitive humans.
That is true. But I think that's fascinating. I'm also interested in, so you set the book in a small village, fictional village called Kosawa. Mm-hmm. But you didn't grow up in a small village. And I'm wondering, did you spend time in any small villages that you thought of as used as models for the village in this story, or what was your exposure to the particular world that you're writing about here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I am from the town of Mbue, which is a town, it's right on the Atlantic Ocean. It's a beautiful town. You should visit it sometime if you have a chance. Okay. But I live in a couple of villages. My mother works for the government, so I lived in 2 different villages. And so I had an African, village childhood. I lived in villages till I was about 8 years old, and I still remember very vividly living in these villages. And they weren't quite like Thula's village. There were houses there that had, electricity. Yeah. Some houses had televisions. It was just, they were more modern. Mm-hmm. And right now those villages are towns. So it's nothing like what Thula lived in. But my neighborhood in Mbue had a feel of a little village also. And I also grew up in a place where, people born in the same year as you refer to them as your age mates. So I remember growing up and having age mates that I played around with. And so I kind of put that into the village as well. This group of children who in the book are referred to as age mates who grew up together.
That was a term that I had never heard before.
It's so funny because Americans, they say, office mates and mates and housemates, but they don't say age mates.
Age mates, I kind of love it.
Well, I had a lot of age mates growing up, so that was, that is where that came from.
Right. Do a couple more questions here. Here's one for you, Mbue. Do you write different genres such as poetry and travel writing?
I don't. I mean, there is a poem. Actually, there are poems in both of my novels. Right? There's a poem in Before the Dreamer. There's a poem in this one. The poem in How Beautiful We Were was very difficult. I'm like, wow, I give it to poets. I really give it to poets. Poetry is not easy. It's really hard. It took me like 1 month to get a poem right, and it was 8 lines. So no, I don't. I do write the occasional essay. I don't think I am a natural essayist as I am at fiction. But
you write short fiction as well too.
I'm sorry?
You write short fiction as well.
I do write short fiction, and my short story is coming out on Sunday. I mean, this next week, the New Yorker is going to publish.
Yeah, congratulations! It's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. And here's a question. I'm interested in this question too. So
okay.
I can't wait for the answer. Are you working on another book at the moment?
Ooh,
the editors don't like to ask this question because it makes writers nervous. So
did my editor put you up to that? My editor probably put you up to that. Wherever you are. No, and you know what I'm doing now? I am recovering from finishing How Beautiful We Were. But I don't. Some people might not know that my book was supposed to come out in June of last year, and then we moved it to March of this year. So I did have enough time to recover. But I have been thinking. Obviously, I've been thinking about characters. I've been thinking about where next I go, and I'm where next I go will be different place also. Just like I moved from New York City to Kosawa, I'm going to go from Kosawa to somewhere else where next I go. I as a writer, I am fascinated by the whole world. So writing allows me to, just like reading allows me to travel and experience other people's, lives. So I am looking forward to a whole sort of different journey.
Yeah. You're amazing. Keep setting challenges for yourself.
The best editor in the world. Can I just brag about you for 2 seconds?
It's an incredible impulse. To keep pushing yourself like that creatively is inspiring. Maybe we'll do one more question here, and it's another good one, I think, about craft. Is how do you develop your characters, right? So a character like Thula, how does she go from a glimmer in your mind to a real person on the page? What is that process for you?
Yeah, so it's so funny because I think maybe Thula wasn't the hardest, because from the moment I started writing, she was the first character I had in mind. But it's a lot of spending time with them. I don't know whether that makes sense. It's a lot of thinking about them all the time. But also because, so unlike in Behold the Dreamers, where I had a character who was an African immigrant woman like me who lived in Harlem, I didn't have to do a lot of research. Thula was helped by the fact that I had read a lot of books about revolutionaries and dissidents, right? So Thula was research. It was a character that, she ends up becoming this leader. And so I had to understand the mind of a leader. And I didn't just read about revolutionaries. I read about, I read biographies of Lincoln and George Washington. I read, biography of Steve Jobs. The minds of these people. I wanted to understand how they think and what makes them so different from the rest of us. Because even though she's a fictional character, she still has to be real. And so that is it. Some characters, they just flow more easily. Thula was a lot of thinking about people who make change and how they go about doing that and what it's like to really sacrifice. Because
that's super interesting, because there are people who I think find their way into character through voice. Right? There's a voice that starts to take form on the page that turns into this person, as opposed to who is this person first, like how is she shaped and who are her influences and who will she grow to be, and then you work your way into what she's going to sound like. There are different ways to do it.
I could do the other way, because like my short story that is going to be published next week in the New Yorker, it was that way. So I started writing and I just wrote this first sentence and I wrote the second sentence, and all of a sudden I just heard this middle-aged West African man, and that was just a voice, and it just made sense. Because I didn't even have I didn't even conceive of this person until I started writing and I heard the voice and I said, oh, you sound like a middle-aged West African man. But with Thula, I knew that I don't meet the Thulas of the world every day, right? I don't meet, and there's also the element where, she makes a lot of sacrifice for the cause that she's fighting for. And so I had to really do justice to the fact that you don't stand up to fight a multinational and not pay a price, right? You don't stand up to try to bring down a corrupt government and not have to make sacrifices. So I had to do a lot of thinking and reading about the Thulas of the world, right? I read the biography of the memoir of Angela Davis, just because she was a woman also, to see like that thing that turns these people. Because again, I couldn't just go by what I think. I had to really make her real. And if people end up saying, oh, I love Thula, it's because I really had to model her after the other Thulas that I had been admired my whole life.
I mean, I think that it's that's beautifully put, and I think I can see that, and I think the novel in general required so much research for
Mm-hmm.
you,
Mm-hmm.
so much you had to understand so much in order to make this believable,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a big, complicated story that doesn't just involve the people in this village. It also involves these larger, complicated forces and
Right.
environmental questions and legal questions and so
Right, and politics and so,
yeah.
international relations and the media, how the media works. Like
Yeah.
there was just so much of it that had to really. I am just a big believer in the fact that you have to do your research.
Yeah.
Novel. Like I love when I read a novel, I'm like, this is also true because I
Yeah,
know.
right. If you don't believe it, then you're not. Then you're never gonna fit. You're not gonna.
So that was that, but I also think that there's also, there's, the people that I see around me, the other characters in the book besides Thula, like Thula's mother, Thula's grandmother.
Right.
I grew up in Africa. I grew up around African women, so they represent a lot of women who are, trying to also push back against the certain systems of injustice, which are not caused by, corporations, but just part of being in the traditional society. So I had more experience with that. So I got inspiration from people in my life.
Well, it's a beautiful. You pulled it off beautifully. The book is remarkable. If I can say so myself.
Thank you, Andy. And once again, I must thank you, Andy, because you are the best editor a writer could ever ask for.
Oh, that's very nice.
This book is what it is because you held my hand and through it all and made sure that I did the best job that I could do.
Well, you did a great job. You did all the work. So I am forever grateful for that. And we're both grateful for everybody here tonight for tuning in, and to Barnes and Noble for hosting this great event. Just want to remind people that How Beautiful We Were is available at your local BNN and 24/7 on bnn.com. So please give it a shot and let us know what you think. Mbue, it's always such a pleasure to see you. Congratulations on everything.
I'll see you soon. Thank you, Barnes and Noble. Thank you, everybody.
All right, take care. That was fun. See ya.